It was supposed to be a routine morning hearing at the federal courthouse in San Francisco. The gallery was quiet, reporters half asleep, and even the security guards seemed bored. At the center of it all stood Judge Edward Chen, a man known for his stern demeanor and unapologetic progressive stance. On the docket that morning was a high-profile pretrial hearing involving a politically charged lawsuit. Representing the defense was none other than Pam Bondi, the fiery former Florida Attorney General and a known Trump ally. She entered the courtroom confident, heels clicking against the marble floor like a drumbeat of defiance. Bondi had come prepared for a legal duel, but not for what was about to happen. As the hearing began, it became clear that Judge Chen was in no mood for diplomacy. He interrupted Bondi's opening statements repeatedly, scoffed at her legal arguments, and at one point even leaned back in his chair and said with a smirk, "I expect better from someone who calls themselves a serious attorney." Gasps echoed in the courtroom. Pam Bondi's face reddened, but she didn't respond. Not yet. The tension was thick. The cameras were rolling. But no one, not even the bailiff, was ready for what would happen just minutes later. Pam Bondi paused, her jaw clenched tight as Judge Chen continued his sarcastic barrage. "Incompetence disguised as charisma," he muttered loudly enough for the courtroom microphones to catch it. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Bondi took a slow breath, then stood straight. Her voice was calm but steely. "Your Honor," she said, "with all due respect, if this courtroom is going to devolve into personal attacks, I'd like a motion to have these proceedings moved or you recused." Judge Chen leaned forward, eyebrows raised. "Is that a threat or just another one of your political stunts, Ms. Bondi?" The courtroom was no longer bored. Phones were out. Reporters were scribbling furiously. Pam didn't flinch. "No, Your Honor. It's a warning. You've compromised the integrity of this bench." But before he could respond, the doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. Two men in dark suits entered briskly, flashing badges. Behind them, a U.S. Marshal. "Judge Edward Chen," one of the agents said loudly, "we have a warrant for your arrest." The room froze. Judge Chen stood, disbelief spreading across his face. "What the hell is this?" he barked. Pam Bondi stepped aside, arms crossed. "Looks like I won't need that motion after all." The crowd erupted into murmurs. The judge's face turned pale as the agents approached the bench. Judge Chen backed away instinctively as the agent stepped closer to the bench. "This is outrageous," he snapped. "I'm a sitting federal judge. You can't just barge in here." The lead agent remained calm. "We can. And we are." He handed a printed document to the court clerk and turned back. "You are under federal investigation for obstruction of justice, abuse of power, and undisclosed financial ties to politically affiliated legal advocacy groups. We have ample evidence, Your Honor." A hush fell over the courtroom. Chen's mouth opened to argue, but no words came out. The cameras captured every second, the shaking of his hands, the tightening of his jaw, the disbelief in his eyes. The marshal stepped forward and took control. "Sir, place your hands behind your back." "You're making a mistake," Chen growled, his voice cracking. "This is politically motivated. I demand to speak to my attorney." "You'll get your chance," the agent replied. "Outside of your courtroom." As Judge Chen was cuffed in front of the stunned audience, a chorus of gasps and flashes from phones and cameras filled the air. He looked around, not for support, but in disbelief that his own domain had turned against him. And then, just before he was escorted through the side exit, he turned back toward Pam Bondi. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. The gavel that once symbolized his power now lay abandoned on the bench. The news broke before Judge Chen had even left the building. Breaking: Federal Judge Edward Chen arrested mid-hearing. Pam Bondi witnesses shocking courtroom takedown. Obstruction, corruption, and collusion? Explosive charges unsealed against respected judge. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had already begun to form. Reporters scrambled to set up live broadcasts while stunned citizens gathered, unsure whether they were witnessing justice or political vengeance. Inside, the courtroom remained in stunned silence for a long moment. Then, slowly, chatter began to fill the void, disbelief, laughter, murmurs of "finally." Pam Bondi gathered her notes calmly and approached the bench. The clerk looked up, still frozen, unsure what came next. "We'll need a new judge assigned to the case," she said coolly. "Preferably one who hasn't compromised the bench." Outside, Chen was placed into a black federal SUV. Cameras caught every moment. His red face, the clenched jaw, the refusal to look at the press. A few hours later, the Justice Department released a brief statement confirming that Judge Edward Chen had been the subject of a sealed federal investigation for months. The charges were serious, funneling court decisions that favored groups he had undisclosed financial interests in, manipulating trial schedules to hurt political adversaries, and communicating off-record with partisan donors. Bondi was interviewed outside the courthouse by a swarm of reporters. "I didn't come here today expecting this," she said, brushing her hair back. "But it's a reminder. No one is above the law, not even those who sit behind the bench." She turned and walked away as microphones followed her. In the distance, the doors of the federal courthouse remained open, but the courtroom where Judge Chen once reigned stood empty. The arrest sent shockwaves through Washington, D.C. and beyond. Judge Edward Chen had been a towering figure in progressive legal circles. Appointed during the Obama administration, praised for his rulings on immigration and civil rights, and frequently invited to speak at top law schools. Now, overnight, his name was smeared across headlines alongside words like corruption, abuse, and fraud. Pam Bondi, once the target of courtroom ridicule, found herself at the center of a political firestorm, but this time with leverage. Cable news networks played the footage of Chen's arrest on loop, with pundits debating whether the arrest was justice long overdue or a chilling sign of deep-rooted partisan warfare in the judiciary. Bondi was invited onto major shows. On one segment she said, "I didn't come to California to embarrass anyone. But I will say this. When people in power think they can silence others with mockery or intimidation, that's when the system is at its most dangerous." Protests began outside the courthouse, two opposing crowds. One chanting for judicial reform, the other claiming the arrest was politically driven. The Department of Justice held a press conference, confirming that Chen's financial records had been under sealed audit for nearly a year. They revealed emails, wire transfers, and communications that showed deliberate favoritism toward advocacy groups that had helped fund overseas shell companies tied to his family's investments. A special counsel was appointed to investigate whether any of Chen's past rulings should be revisited. Meanwhile, Bondi returned to Florida, where she was greeted as a hero in some circles. Offers for speaking engagements, op-eds, and even a potential book deal poured in. But behind the scenes she stayed quiet. She knew the legal world had changed. And she knew the backlash wasn't over, for anyone. What started as an ordinary courtroom hearing had cracked open a door into something much bigger. Something darker. Weeks passed. Judge Edward Chen, now stripped of his robe and awaiting trial, remained out on bail but under house arrest. He issued a defiant statement through his legal team claiming he was the victim of a calculated political hit job. But the evidence told another story. Leaked documents revealed a disturbing pattern. Hidden offshore accounts, falsified disclosures, and emails discussing ways to tip the scale in key cases. The final blow came when a former clerk came forward, confirming that Chen had asked them to delay rulings based on political timing. The nation was stunned. So was the judiciary. Judicial review boards convened emergency panels. A dozen high-profile rulings made by Chen were now under scrutiny. Appeals were being filed at record speed. Meanwhile, Pam Bondi kept her public appearances measured. When asked about her confrontation with Chen, she simply said, "I wasn't there to take him down. I was there to stand up for the law. He did the rest himself." In Washington, lawmakers seized the moment to propose new judicial ethics laws, something both parties had long avoided. There was resistance, of course, but momentum had shifted. Trust in the justice system had been shaken, and people demanded reform. At Chen's arraignment, the same courtroom that once echoed with his sarcasm now sat quiet as he entered in a gray suit, looking tired and older. The judge presiding over his case? A no-nonsense conservative appointee from Texas. As the charges were read, Chen kept his eyes down. Bondi wasn't there. She didn't need to be. The legal system had turned on itself, and this time, it was the bench under judgment. The courtroom cleared out slowly that day. Reporters rushed to deliver their sound bites. Protesters chanted outside. And in the middle of the chaos, one thing was clear. Power unchecked is a danger. And even the highest judge can fall. The story didn't end with the courtroom lights dimming on Judge Chen. In fact, his fall triggered a tidal wave of consequences that rippled far beyond the courthouse steps. Across the country, federal judges began facing renewed scrutiny. Ethics complaints, long buried or ignored, were now being dusted off and re-examined. Judicial accountability became the centerpiece of Senate hearings, with fiery debates about lifetime appointments, oversight gaps, and conflicts of interest. The phrase, Chen effect, entered political vocabulary, a shorthand for sudden reversals of power and the perils of unchecked authority on the bench. Meanwhile, Pam Bondi kept a low profile for a time. But her influence grew in the background. She was invited to testify before Congress on judicial bias, and her poised, articulate testimony went viral. "If we allow personal ideology to override legal objectivity," she told lawmakers, "we don't just lose public trust. We lose justice itself." Within months, Bondi was tapped to lead a nonpartisan legal reform committee aimed at crafting national standards for judicial disclosure and recusal. Critics questioned her impartiality. Supporters praised her courage. But one thing was clear: she had become a force in a debate no one could afford to ignore. As for Judge Chen, his trial loomed. Legal analysts said the evidence was overwhelming. Plea deals were rumored. Some of his former allies distanced themselves. Others claimed he was a scapegoat, a sacrifice to protect a wider, more corrupt system. 1 year after the courtroom arrest, a Netflix documentary titled Behind the Robe: The Rise and Fall of Judge Edward Chen premiered to massive viewership. And in the very same courtroom where it all began, a new judge now presided, one chosen not for political leanings but for integrity and transparency. On the wall behind the bench, the words etched in marble still read, "Equal justice under law." But now, people were paying attention to whether those words still meant something. A year and a half after the infamous arrest, the trial of Edward Chen finally began. The courtroom was packed with press, observers, and legal scholars, all eager to witness the rare prosecution of a federal judge. Chen's defense tried to spin a narrative of political persecution. They pointed fingers at far-right operatives, media manipulation, and even Pam Bondi herself. But the evidence was overwhelming: bank statements, emails, encrypted messages, and whistleblower testimony that painted a damning picture of corruption cloaked in legal robes. In a dramatic moment during cross-examination, a former judicial assistant tearfully admitted that Chen pressured her into altering a filing date to favor a group that had donated thousands to his family's nonprofit. That moment shattered any remaining illusion of innocence. Outside, the courthouse lawn became a battlefield of ideology. Protesters held signs that read, "No judge above the law," while others shouted about deep state takedowns and conspiracies. But the public, increasingly exhausted by spin, began demanding truth over tribalism. Pam Bondi was subpoenaed to testify. Calm and resolute, she recounted the infamous day in court. "He didn't just mock me, he mocked the justice system. The arrest wasn't about politics. It was about integrity." Her testimony was broadcast live. Within hours, trending hashtags flooded social media. Hashtag justice served. Hashtag no one above the law. Hashtag Pam Bondi testifies. When the verdict came in, the courtroom was silent. Guilty, on all major counts: obstruction of justice, financial fraud, and ethical misconduct. Chen's sentence? 12 years in federal prison with no chance of early parole. He showed no emotion as the sentence was read. But as he was led away in cuffs for the second time, he looked up at the gallery. The power, the pride, the sharpness, all gone. Pam Bondi, watching from the back, said nothing. She simply stood, nodded once, and left without fanfare. The story became a case study in law schools. A warning to future judges. A lesson to those who believed they were untouchable. And as the nation moved forward, one truth echoed louder than ever before. The robe doesn't make you immune. It makes you accountable. In the years that followed Edward Chen's conviction, his name became synonymous with one of the darkest chapters in recent judicial history. But paradoxically, his downfall sparked one of the most comprehensive legal overhauls in decades. Congress passed the Federal Judicial Integrity Act, requiring mandatory financial transparency for all federal judges, term-based performance reviews, and an independent ethics oversight board. For the first time, judges could be held to the same scrutiny as elected officials. And it all began with that explosive moment in Chen's courtroom. Pam Bondi, once seen as a partisan firebrand, was now viewed by many as a symbol of principled resilience. Her bipartisan push for judicial reform earned her respect across the aisle. She turned down multiple offers to run for office, instead focusing on building a legal foundation that trained young lawyers in ethics, accountability, and constitutional integrity. In interviews, she often downplayed her role. "I didn't take him down. He did that to himself. I just stood my ground when it mattered." But people didn't forget. Documentaries, books, and university lectures cited her courtroom moment as the turning point, not just in the case, but in a national awakening about the hidden corruption that can fester behind even the most sacred institutions. As for Judge Chen, he remained in prison, silent and removed from the spotlight he once commanded. Appeals failed. His legacy was forever rewritten, not as a progressive pioneer, but as a cautionary tale of ego, entitlement, and betrayal of the bench. A plaque now hangs in that San Francisco courtroom. It reads, "Justice must not only be done, it must be seen to be done." This courtroom once forgot that. May it never again. In the end, the story wasn't just about a judge or a courtroom. It was about a nation remembering that true justice is blind, not to truth but to power. The ripple effects of Judge Chen's downfall stretched far beyond the courthouse walls. Across the country, state and local judicial systems initiated reviews of their own judges' ethics and financial disclosures. Transparency became the new mandate. Legal watchdog groups flourished, empowered by increased public interest and funding. The old culture of judge knows best gave way to a more accountable, open system where whistleblowers felt supported, and courts embraced oversight as a means of strengthening, not weakening justice. Pam Bondi's role in exposing judicial corruption sparked intense debate. Some criticized her motives, but many acknowledged the courage it took to stand up to a powerful figure under such hostile circumstances. She became a keynote speaker at law conferences, advocating for reforms that could prevent another Chen scandal. The media, having covered the saga in exhaustive detail, highlighted the critical role of independent journalism in holding power accountable. The case inspired documentaries, podcasts, and investigative reports focusing on the delicate balance between judicial independence and transparency. At the heart of it all was a simple lesson. No system is infallible and no one is above scrutiny. The courtroom where Judge Edward Chen once ruled with an iron fist now symbolized hope, a reminder that justice is not just about authority, but about fairness, responsibility, and integrity. And in that courtroom, etched in the marble, the words still resonated louder than ever. Equal justice under law. The end. After the dust settled, the judicial system faced a reckoning like never before. Reforms passed swiftly, mandatory disclosures, regular ethics audits, and a national commission dedicated to judicial accountability. No longer could judges operate in the shadows. Pam Bondi's courtroom confrontation with Edward Chen became a defining moment, a symbol of courage, justice, and the power of speaking truth to authority. Her continued advocacy helped ensure that the system learned from its failures. Though Judge Chen's career ended in disgrace, the movement sparked by his arrest inspired a generation of lawyers, judges, and citizens committed to transparency and fairness. The courtroom where it all unfolded became a site of pilgrimage for those who believe in the true meaning of justice. A justice that demands accountability, humility, and unwavering integrity. And so, from scandal rose reform. From downfall, hope. Because the law is not just rules on paper, it's the foundation of trust between a people and their government. And that trust must never be broken.